Your contract is canceled immediately. The words fell from the mouth of Douglas Rigsby, the vice president of operations, like heavy stones dropping onto a polished mahogany table. He stood at the head of the boardroom, arms crossed tightly over his chest, wearing the smug, impenetrable expression of a corporate executive who had never once been forced to clean up his own mess. He looked down his nose at me, expecting a dramatic reaction. I remained silent, looking up from my laptop screen where lines of code were scrolling across 3 separate terminal windows. The security architecture I had spent 9 months building was running flawlessly. Every single indicator on my control panel was a steady, calming green. The $720 million defense grid, protecting Centurion systems and 24 Fortune 500 clients, was performing exactly as designed, humming quietly in the background of our conversation. I slowly adjusted my glasses and spoke in a calm, measured voice. "Excuse me, Douglas, could you repeat that?" "You heard me, Ryan," he said, his voice dripping with condescension as he leaned forward, placing his palms flat on the table. "We are terminating your consulting agreement, effective immediately. We are taking our security operations in a different direction. You have exactly 15 minutes to pack your personal belongings, close your files, and exit the premises." Around the table, the other executives suddenly found their documents and coffee cups incredibly interesting. Clara Hensley from legal stared intently at her yellow legal pad, scribbling meaningless lines to avoid looking at me. Frank Albright, the finance chief, took a slow, deliberate sip from his mug, refusing to meet my gaze. Only Olivia Gable, the chief technology officer who had fought to hire me 9 months ago, shifted uncomfortably in her leather chair, her mouth opening slightly as if to protest, before she caught Rigsby's warning glare and fell silent. She knew as well as I did the mistake he was making, but she lacked the authority to overrule the vice president of operations. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam my laptop shut or demand a dramatic explanation. Instead, I let a quiet, knowing smile touch the corners of my mouth. I began systematically closing my active terminal windows, saving my current sessions, and disconnecting my external hard drives. "That is it," Rigsby demanded, his brow furrowing as he watched my calm movements. "No protests, no begging for your job. I thought a high-priced consultant like you would have more to say when shown the door." I stood up, carefully winding my power cable and placing it into my leather briefcase. "What would be the point of protesting, Douglas? You have clearly made your decision, and I have no desire to stay where my expertise is not valued or understood." "You are damn right." "I made a decision," Rigsby sneered. "This company does not need overpriced external contractors who think they are irreplaceable. My internal IT staff is more than capable of running the systems you built. We do not need your services anymore. We can run this place without your expensive oversight." I closed my briefcase and snapped the brass latches shut. "I am sure you believe that," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly neutral as I gathered my coat. His confidence flickered for a fraction of a second. Something in my calm demeanor seemed to register in his mind, but his ego was far too massive to allow him to back down in front of his peers. "Security will escort you from the building," he announced, waving his hand toward the double doors where 2 uniformed guards stood waiting. "That will not be necessary," I said, slinging the strap of my briefcase over my shoulder. "I know the way out. But before I leave, I have one question for you, Douglas. Who is going to explain to the chairman why the entire security grid will cease to function in exactly 6 minutes?" The silence that fell over the boardroom was absolute. Rigsby's face, previously flushed with the triumph of his power play, suddenly lost its color. "What did you just say?" he stammered, his arms falling to his sides. I checked the face of my watch. "Actually, it is 5 minutes and 30 seconds now. My cryptographic credentials must authenticate with the primary server every 96 hours. If that does not happen, the system recognizes a critical breach, assumes it is compromised, and initiates an automatic, complete lockdown. It is a standard security feature to protect a $720 million network." "You are bluffing," Rigsby said, though his voice had lost its aggressive edge. "You would not dare sabotage this company." I began walking toward the door, nodding politely to Olivia. "It is not sabotage, Douglas. It is the exact specification outlined in my contract under the security fail-safe provisions, but I am sure your internal team can handle it. You have 4 minutes and 45 seconds left. Good luck, my name is Ryan Vance. Before that day in the boardroom, most people in the industry knew me as the architect who built the impossible. I was not born into wealth. My father was a mechanic in Detroit, and my mother managed a diner. They taught me to solve problems with whatever tools you have, and to treat everyone with respect, regardless of title. Dad said a person who looks down on the cleaner is the same person who crumbles when things go wrong, because they do not respect the foundation. I carried that philosophy through college and into every contract over my 20 years of experience. Douglas Rigsby was about to learn that ignoring it was an expensive mistake. I walked out of the boardroom and down the quiet carpeted hallway of the executive suite, the 2 security guards trailing behind me at a respectful distance. Behind me, the boardroom door burst open, and the sound of panicked, raised voices spilled into the corridor. I did not quicken my pace. I walked toward the elevators, pressed the call button, and waited. Before the elevator doors could open, Olivia Gable ran down the hall, her heels clicking rapidly against the polished floor. "Ryan, wait," she gasped, stopping a few feet from me. "Please, tell me you are exaggerating. Is the system really going to lock down?" I turned to face her, maintaining my calm expression. "Hello, Olivia? Yes, it is. The system requires my active digital signature to verify that the primary architect is still monitoring the network. Since Douglas just terminated my contract and deactivated my profile, the primary server will register my absence as an unauthorized takeover. At that point, the entire system encrypts its own root directories and disconnects all external nodes." "Is there no override?" she asked, her eyes wide with worry. "There is an override sequence," I explained, "but it requires the complete technical documentation that I prepared." As you might recall, Douglas refused to approve the $22,000 invoice for the complete documentation package, claiming it was an unnecessary expense. The basic documentation he received only goes up to Section 9. The override protocols are in Section 12. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside and turned around. "I am sorry, Olivia. You were always professional with me, but I cannot work under these conditions." "Ryan, please," she began. But the door slid shut, cutting her off. By the time I reached the ground floor and walked out into the crisp morning air, the digital countdown on my phone had reached 0. At that exact moment, the security grid of Centurion Systems went dark. Under my consulting agreement, which Douglas clearly had not read, the proprietary source code for the security grid remained my intellectual property. The contract granted Centurion Systems a conditional software license that was strictly tied to my active participation as the primary architect. The moment they terminated my contract without cause, that license evaporated. Under Title 17, Section 106 of the United States Code, any unauthorized use, modification, or attempt to bypass my software constitutes a direct and willful federal copyright infringement. As I sat in a coffee shop across the street, my phone began to vibrate. It was a text message from Clara Hensley, the legal counsel. She had just received a formal cease and desist letter from my attorney, outlining the federal statutes and notifying the company that any attempt to reverse engineer my security grid would result in statutory damages of up to $150,000 per violation. Furthermore, the letter pointed out that Douglas's unilateral decision to terminate the contract without consulting the technical board constituted a direct breach of fiduciary duty under state corporate law, exposing the executives to personal liability for any resulting financial losses. Looking through the window of the coffee shop, I could see the glass building of Centurion Systems. The lights were still on, but the internal chaos was visible even from across the street. Employees were gathering near the windows, talking animatedly on their mobile phones. My phone rang. It was Rigsby. I answered and placed it on the table, switching to speakerphone. "Ryan, you backstabbing piece of work." Rigsby screamed, his voice cracking with rage. "The entire network is down. 25 of our largest clients, including Apex Aerospace, have lost their monitoring feeds. We are facing millions of dollars in liability. I will sue you for everything you own." I took a slow sip of my black coffee. "Douglas, I suggest you lower your voice and speak to your legal counsel. She will explain that you currently have no legal right to touch that software. If your IT team tries to force an override, you will be violating federal copyright law. Furthermore, you are already in breach of your contract with Apex Aerospace, which carries a $60 million penalty for security downtime. You did this to yourself. I will pay you, he blurted out, his anger suddenly turning into desperation. I will write you a check for $8 million right now if you come back and turn it on. I smiled, looking at the steam rising from my cup. It does not work that way, Douglas. The system is in a secure lockdown. Even if I wanted to, it takes time and the proper authorization. And frankly, your $8 million means nothing to me if I have to continue dealing with your incompetence. You made a foolish business decision based on your ego, and now you must face the consequences of your actions. The elevator ride down was slow, the soft ambient music playing in the cabin contrasting sharply with the silent tension rising in the building. I could feel the invisible threads of the network snapping one by one as the primary server shut down its connections. The coffee shop across the street was a quiet refuge, smelling of roasted beans and warm pastries. I sat near the window, watching the reflection of the glass skyscraper where Centurion Systems was housed, a massive monument to corporate pride. My attorney, a sharp contract specialist named Mason Vance, who was also my cousin, had drafted our consulting agreements with meticulous care. He knew that corporations frequently tried to exploit independent contractors, and he had built the copyright clause specifically to prevent this kind of situation. Before Douglas could respond, the line went dead. 10 seconds later, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed the name of the executive suite receptionist. I answered, "Ryan, please hold for Julian Thorne." The receptionist's voice was shaking. I waited. Julian Thorne was the founder and chairman of Centurion Systems. A self-made billionaire in his late 60s, he was known for his sharp intellect, his absolute intolerance for corporate political games, and his deep respect for technical expertise. He was not a man you wanted to cross. Ryan. Thorne's deep voice boomed through the speaker. I am sitting in my office looking at a blank security monitor, and I have the chief executive of Apex Aerospace on my other line asking why his defense systems are blind. Explain to me what is happening. I took a deep breath. Good morning, Mr. Thorne. I was fired 45 minutes ago by Douglas Rigsby. He terminated my contract effective immediately, which triggered a security lockdown protocol that I designed to protect the system from unauthorized access. Since my credentials were removed, the system assumed a hostile takeover was in progress and encrypted the root directories. Thorne was silent for a long moment. Rigsby fired you. Why? He claimed my consulting fees were too high and that his internal IT team could manage the system. However, he refused to purchase the technical documentation that would allow his team to perform an override, and my contract stipulates that the software license terminates if my services are discontinued without cause. I see, Thorne said, his voice dangerously quiet. And what are the legal implications of this? My attorney has sent a formal notice to Clara Hensley. Any attempt by your internal IT team to bypass the encryption or modify the code violates Title 17, Section 106 of the United States Code. Furthermore, the contract termination without board approval is a breach of fiduciary duty by the Operations Department, exposing the company to significant shareholder litigation. Thorne sighed, a sound like dry paper rubbing together. Douglas is an idiot. He has always let his ego run ahead of his brain. I apologize for his behavior, Ryan. You have built a remarkable system, and I want you back. What are your terms? I had prepared for this moment. I pulled a document up on my tablet. Mr. Thorne, I will not return as a temporary consultant. If I am to secure this company, I must have the authority to do so properly. Here are my terms. First, I want a permanent position as Chief Security Officer, with a seat on the Executive Board. Second, I require a $30 million annual budget for security operations and personnel upgrades. Third, I want full authority over all IT security decisions, meaning the IT department will report directly to me on security matters. Finally, my contract must include a termination clause requiring a unanimous board vote and a 120-day notice period. Thorne did not hesitate. Done. I will have Clara draft the contract immediately. You will have your board seat and your budget. Now, how long will it take to get our clients back online? It will take approximately 110 minutes. Once I am back in the server room, I replied. I need my credentials restored and a formal signing of the contract before I begin. Get back over here, Ryan. The contract will be ready when you arrive. And Douglas will be waiting to hand you your new security badge. 5 minutes later, I walked back through the front doors of Centurion Systems. The atmosphere in the lobby was tense, with employees whispering in corners. As I reached the elevator, Douglas Rigsby stepped out, his face pale and his hands trembling. He held a black security badge in his hand. "Here," he muttered, refusing to look me in the eye as he handed it to me. "Thank you, Douglas," I said politely, taking the badge. "I believe you have a meeting with the chairman tomorrow morning. I suggest you prepare your remarks." Julian Thorne was a legend in the technology sector, a man who had built Centurion Systems from a small local consulting firm into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. He was known for his sharp tongue and his ability to see through executive nonsense in a matter of seconds. He had spent his early career in the field, pulling cables and configuring routers, which gave him a deep respect for the people who actually did the work. He had no patience for vice presidents who managed by spreadsheet and ignored the technical realities of the systems they were supposed to oversee. The executive boardroom looked different. When I walked back in, the atmosphere charged with a quiet desperation. Rigsby stood by the window, his arms limp at his sides, looking out at the city as if searching for a way to escape the impending disaster of his own making. Olivia Gable gave me a small, encouraging nod as I took my seat across from her chair. She had been the only one who understood the value of my work, and I knew that having her support on the board would be crucial for the changes I planned to make in the coming months. The new contract was printed on heavy, high-quality paper, the signature lines at the bottom waiting to seal the agreement. I read through the clauses carefully, ensuring that my authority was absolute and that my budget was secured against any future operational interference. The server room of Centurion Systems was located in the basement, protected by 4 heavy security doors, biometric scanners, and a dedicated cooling system that kept the air at a constant 60 degrees. It was a space designed for silence and absolute control, but today it was filled with the anxious energy of the internal IT staff. Nathan Drake, the head of IT, was staring at a monitor filled with red error messages when I walked in, followed by Chloe Bennett, one of his lead network engineers. They both looked exhausted and terrified. "Ryan, thank God," Nathan said, running a hand through his hair. "We tried running diagnostics, but the system locked us out of the primary directory. We did not touch the code, I swear. Legal warned us to remain away from it." "You made the right call, Nathan," I said, setting my briefcase on the central table. "If you had tried to bypass the encryption, the system would have interpreted it as an active cyber attack and wiped the secondary backup servers. Let us get to work." I sat down at the primary terminal and entered my newly restored credentials. The screen flashed, recognizing my digital signature. I began entering the complex restoration sequence, a 48-character string of alphanumeric symbols and cryptographic keys that I had memorized. As the diagnostic sequence began its 58-minute scan to verify that no malicious actors had attempted to exploit the downtime, I turned to Nathan and Chloe. "This is a good opportunity for you to learn how this architecture actually works," I said, pulling up a schematic of the system on a side monitor. "The security grid is built on a 3-layer defense model, which I call the moat, the wall, and the keep. The outer layer, the moat, is our automated traffic filter. It uses behavioral analysis to monitor incoming data packets. If a connection deviates from normal parameters, it is flagged." "What about the second layer?" Chloe asked, leaning in. "That is the wall," I explained. "It manages active threat detection. If a threat passes the moat, the wall isolates it in a virtual sandbox or a honeypot. The attacker thinks they are accessing our real databases, but they are actually playing in a simulated environment while we trace their origin. This protects our clients while gathering evidence for law enforcement." "And the keep?" Nathan asked. "The keep is the core," I said. "It holds the proprietary data of our 24 Fortune 500 clients. It is protected by quantum-resistant encryption. Even if an attacker breached the first 2 layers, They would need more computing power than currently exists on Earth to decrypt the data. The only way in is through authorized cryptographic credentials. While we waited for the scan to complete, Clara Hensley entered the server room carrying a folder. She handed it to me with a respectful nod. The chairman signed it, Ryan. You are officially our chief security officer. Your budget of $30 million is approved, and your termination clause is locked in. I signed my copy of the contract and handed it back to Clara. Thank you, Clara. At exactly 58 minutes, the terminal chimed. The threat assessment was complete. No unauthorized access attempts had been detected during the lockdown. The system was clean. Now we begin the restoration, I told Nathan and Chloe. We restore the wall first, then the moat. We must bring the security layers online in reverse order to ensure the system is protected during the transition. I began typing the command sequences, watching as the red indicators on the screen slowly shifted to yellow, and then to a solid, reassuring green. The internal monitoring systems came online, showing nominal performance. Now, we reconnect the clients, I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. We will do this one by one to prevent any network congestion or routing errors. We start with Apex Aerospace. The monitor showed the connection establishing. Within seconds, the status bar turned green, one client online. Next was Summit Capital, then Meridian Production. Methodically, we worked our way through the list of 24 major corporations. Exactly 110 minutes. After I entered the server room, the final indicator turned green. The entire security grid of Centurion Systems was fully operational, protecting billions of dollars in client assets once again. Nathan let out a long breath, slumping into his chair. That was the longest 2 hours of my life. Get some rest, Nathan, I said, closing my laptop. Tomorrow we start building a real security team. The air in the server room had a distinct metallic smell, the scent of hundreds of high-powered processors running at full capacity. The blue and green lights of the server racks blinked in a rhythmic pattern, a digital heartbeat that had been temporarily disrupted. Nathan and Chloe watched the progress bar on my monitor with the intensity of spectators at a championship game. They had spent months working under Rigsby's budget cuts, struggling to keep the network stable with inadequate resources and outdated hardware. I explained to them that a good security architect must think like both a builder and a thief. You must understand the weaknesses of your own structure before you can hope to protect it from someone who wants to tear it down. The quantum-resistant encryption we used was based on complex lattice problems, a mathematical shield that would remain secure even against the next generation of supercomputers. It was the crown jewel of the security grid, the final barrier protecting our clients' most sensitive data. The next morning at 8:15, I walked into the executive offices of Centurion Systems. The atmosphere was completely different from the previous day. The panic had vanished, replaced by the quiet, efficient hum of a successful corporation. The employees I passed in the hallway nodded to me with a new level of respect. At 10 o'clock, I walked into the executive conference room for my first official meeting as Chief Security Officer. I took my seat next to Olivia Gable. At the far end of the table sat Douglas Rigsby, looking small and defeated. Julian Thorne entered the room exactly at 10:15. He did not say a word as he walked to the head of the table. He stood for a moment, looking at each of us, before his gaze settled on Douglas. Douglas, Thorne said, his voice calm but absolute. Your reassignment is effective immediately. You are being moved to a special projects role in our logistics division. You will have no direct reports, no budget authority, and your compensation will be reduced by 40%. Rigsby nodded silently, his face pale. He knew he was lucky to keep his job. His pride had cost him his executive standing, but the chairman was merciful enough to allow him a path to redemption, albeit a very long and quiet one. Thorne then turned to me. Ryan, your security review board is approved. I expect your first report by the end of the month. You will have it, Mr. Thorne, I replied. Over the next 4 months, my life became a whirlwind of productive activity. With my $30 million budget, I hired 4 new security specialists to support Nathan and Chloe, giving them the resources they had desperately needed for years. We upgraded our monitoring hardware and established weekly security training sessions for all departments. But my favorite part of the new job was the security lab I held every Friday afternoon. I invited employees from every level of the company to participate, teaching them how to spot phishing attempts, how to manage passwords securely, and how to understand the role they played in protecting our network. My father, who had worked for decades as a mechanic in Detroit, always told me that a machine is only as good as the person maintaining it. He taught me to respect the tools, but more importantly, to respect the people who use them. That philosophy guided every decision I made as chief security officer. I did not want to build a culture of fear. I wanted to build a culture of shared responsibility and competence. One afternoon, 4 months after the lockdown, Julian Thorne called me into his office. He was looking over our quarterly performance reports, a rare smile on his face. "Ryan," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Our clients have never felt more secure. The feedback from Apex Aerospace has been outstanding. They are renewing their contract and expanding their services with us." "I am glad to hear that, Mr. Thorne. The team has worked hard." "I know they have," Thorne said, "and that is why I am making another change. Olivia Gable has recommended that we combine our technical operations. I want you to take on the role of Chief Technology Officer as well, working in partnership with Olivia to oversee all engineering and security infrastructure." I looked at him, surprised. "That is a significant responsibility, Mr. Thorne. You have earned it, Ryan. You showed this company that technical competence must be paired with strategic authority. You did not just save our security grid. You changed the way we think about leadership." I accepted the promotion, knowing that the journey from an external consultant to the top of the corporate ladder had not been about personal revenge. It was about standing up for the value of expertise, respecting the people who do the work, and building systems that last. That evening, I called my parents in Detroit to share the news. My father listened to me describe my new role, and I could hear the pride in his voice. "CO and CSO Ryan," he said with a chuckle. "That is a lot of letters. Just remember to keep your hands clean and your tools sharp." "I will, Dad," I promised. "I will," as I hung up the phone and looked out over the city lights from my office window. I knew that the security grid I built was strong, but the culture we were building was even stronger. And that was the best revenge of all. The logistics division of Centurion Systems was housed in a plain warehouse building 3 miles away from the corporate headquarters. It was a clear signal to everyone in the company that Rigsby's influence had been completely neutralized. The 4 new security specialists I hired were young, talented, and eager to learn. They brought a fresh energy to the IT department, transforming it from a reactive help desk into a proactive security operations center. We spent the next several months auditing every system, patching vulnerabilities that Rigsby's team had ignored, and building a comprehensive disaster recovery plan. It was hard work, but the sense of shared purpose made it incredibly satisfying. My father's words echoed in my mind as I walked through the server rooms, checking the progress of our upgrades. He had taught me that a good mechanic does not just fix the engine. He teaches the driver how to care for the car.